women spend the last, on average, 12 years of their lives in cascading bad health. Estrogen, we know, is neuroprotective. And when your estrogen is depleted, and when it's not depleted in a regular way, which happens during perimenopause, but in an irregular way, it can create all kinds of challenges for you, especially when it comes to your brain health. And it shouldn't be ignored. Hormone replacement can actually help your brain health. Up to 90% of our health span and our lifespan is within our control. That's scary and empowering at the same time. Research done in the United States by Professor Becca Levy, who's at Yale University. What she found was that those of us who think positively about our own aging and the aging of others have the capability of living longer, like up to 7 to 10 years longer, and we have better health.
Maddy, I am so excited to have you here today. Just even looking at the title of your book, Ageless Aging is obviously very appealing. I think we all want to be living younger, but just the fact that it really is a woman's guide to increasing health span, brain span, and lifespans, amazing, because so much of that information out there at the moment is very sort of male centric. So I'm excited to dive into this. Firstly, a very warm welcome to the show.
Yeah. Could you, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you just said.
Did you not? Can you hear me now?
Low volume, sorry. I heard part of it, but not the question.
How bizarre. Can you hear me talking now?
Now I can hear you much better.
Okay. That's really strange. I was trying to check my settings. But you're hearing me now, yeah?
Now I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, I'll do it again. Okay, no worries. Okay. Maddy, I am so excited to have you here today. Just so super pumped about the book that's coming out in May, Ageless Aging for Women. You know, most of the content that we hear is from men, and it's kind of directed towards men. And it's just really, really refreshing to have this material, a woman's guide to increasing health span, brain span, and lifespan. I love it. I love the book. I think it's fantastic. Can't wait to dive in. Firstly, a very warm welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Angela. It is such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive in. Let's start with just kick off with a little bit about your background and why you've written this book for women.
Sure. First, just in general, women and men, we're really at the very beginnings of longevity, of a longevity revolution, really. We've never, up until recently, have had the opportunity to live long lives. So this is new territory. And what's really interesting is that women outlive men. In the US, about 6 years, in the UK, about 4 years. And, throughout the world, we do outlive men. And yet, as you pointed out, there's very few books out there about women and longevity. So I've been on this beat of longevity and aging and retirement for, close to 40 years. So you do the math, you can figure it out. I'm 74 years old, and along the way, I've had the great opportunity to do a lot of research on the subject, but also to talk to the leaders on the cutting edge, scientists, physicians, researchers, people who are really devoting their lives to understanding longevity and the ramifications. And I've used myself as a little bit of a guinea pig, tried things out. Some things worked, some things didn't. And what I realized was that I didn't want to just hold that information close to me. I wanted to share it with women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond who are maybe feeling some of the aches and pains that come with living a longer life, or maybe they're dealing with a chronic condition like, I don't know, heart disease or diabetes, or maybe they just want to have more energy and vitality. Brain health became something that really clearly was something that women wanted to focus on because, as you likely know, more women than men get Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. In fact, 2/3 of all cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease is by women. So this is a women's disease. It's kind of scary. And yet there's very few books out there, if any, that really zero in on what it means for women to live a long life. And I wanted to correct that.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I'm looking at you and I actually can't believe that you just said you're 74 years old because you look so young. So whatever you're doing, it's 100% working. You look incredible. Um, and as you say there, I think, I have a personal experience. My mum has Alzheimer's. And I think that, I look back now and I think, were there signs that I didn't spot? Things that were going on maybe as she went through menopause that then, later, because I've read that actually those symptoms can, begin, not the symptoms, not necessarily, but the disease itself begins at least sort of 20 years before. And it makes you wonder.
That's
And I just
exactly
think,
right. Yeah, I also have Alzheimer's in my family. My grandmother and my mother, both, I watched both of them go through horrible declines. And I recognize the fact that this is a scary thing because up until very recently, we thought there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. Your genes were your destiny. And if that doesn't scare us women who have Alzheimer's in our family, I don't know what does. But the good news is that researchers and scientists have changed their tune. They now come out and they say, yeah, there are things you can do, and you can even prevent or at the very least, delay the onset of Alzheimer's or cognitive decline. And that to me is like a breath of fresh air. I mean, come on. The fact is, it's in our control, and that's empowering.
hugely, hugely empowering. So when we look at a woman's guide, right, to reversing aging, if you like, or slowing it down somewhat, what are the key things that we need to think about from a kind of physiological perspective, right? What are the kind of tests? If someone's listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, well, I want to age as gracefully as you are and really truly live younger. What kind of tests should they be running or speaking to their doctor about so that they can get a baseline and track things over time?
Well, that is a big question, Angela, and let me try to pull some of the threads on it. So first, just so everyone can understand it, and I'm sure they do because your listeners are smart and pretty savvy, we used to believe, as in Alzheimer's, that all diseases and aging itself was something that was not in our control, that our genes were our destiny. Not anymore. Scientists, even Calico, which is owned by Google, which is a longevity laboratory, they came out very recently and said up to 90% of our health span and our lifespan is within our control. Now, that's scary and empowering at the same time. So, just to get more clarity on it, that has to do with our lifestyle and the environment. Those two elements have become much more important. So, to me, longevity is great. We want to live a long life, but we also want our health span, which is the number of healthy years we live, to better match our lifespan. Now, today in the US and the UK, just as an example, women spend the last, on average, 12 years of their lives in cascading bad health. And that does not sound like any fun to me. So, from the research I did, from the scientists and people that I spoke to, physicians, what I realized is, yeah, it's not just about one thing. It's sure exercise is kind of a silver bullet, and I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But what I realized was that it's about a holistic group of elements. So it's about our hormones. It's about our sleep. It's about, believe it or not, our money, our finances, and how we deal with it. And by the way, all of these things work together and influence each other. They're not like in silos that don't really interface with each other. So, for instance, using finance, because that's the craziest one to think about in terms of does it affect our health and well-being and our longevity. If you don't have your money game together, you're not going to be able to afford to pay for health care. It's also going to create stress for you, and that stress may in fact manifest as disease, certainly as aches and pains, certainly as anxiety. So that's not a good thing. If you don't get your sleep, it affects your hormones, it affects your cognitive capabilities. So again, these things all work together. Now, zero in on a few things that you can do that can really make a kind of quick and easy difference, if you will. There's a few things that come to mind. First, I think that there's something called the positivity effect. And to me, this one is amazing, which is part of why I told you my age, that I'm 74. There was research done in the United States by Professor Becca Levy, who's at Yale University, and it was a long study done over 10 years. What she found was that those of us who think positively about our own aging and the aging of others have the capability of living longer, like up to 7 to 10 years longer, and we have better health. Now, what could be better than that? I mean,
That's
reframing
amazing.
your point of view. So
Yeah.
I would urge all women everywhere to proudly state their age and say, and you know what? That's really cool. I'm 74. I look good. I feel good. I have a lot of purpose in my life. Isn't that a great thing? And we can change the narrative of aging. So that's one thing. Another thing, and I know you've talked about this in other programs, and that is this whole idea of intermittent fasting. So I talked to Dr. Walter Longo, who is the pioneer behind intermittent fasting. He came up with the concept, and he told me that it is totally misunderstood, that the biohackers at the cutting edge who spend 16 to 18 hours fasting, that's actually bad for your health, especially for women. It can cause all kinds of problems. And so, however, he does like the idea of intermittent fasting. He said that the average woman in particular should spend 12 to 13 hours not eating. So think about it. That's really easy. You go
Mm.
stop eating dinner at 8 o'clock, let's say, just to come up with a random number, and you don't eat breakfast until 8 o'clock in the morning. That's pretty easy to do. And by the way, he also told me that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So this is from the physician who came up with the whole concept of intermittent fasting. So I
Mm.
thought
I
that was
remember actually speaking to the CEO of his company, and he
Prolon.
was dispelling, and he was dispelling the myth around it because, as you say, I think a lot of people start fasting for say 16 hours, and they're like, "Yeah, it's great, I'm doing all these benefits and helping my longevity, and it's helping with autophagy." When in reality, when they've tested it, they found that most people don't go into autophagy for about 72 hours, and in some metabolically unhealthy people, which I think there's some crazy stat that 93% of Americans are metabolically
That is
unhealthy,
absolutely
unfortunately.
right.
It takes like 4 to 5 days. So you'd have to do a very long fast, which I think why he developed Prolon, right? So that people could have something that they were eating that mimicked the fasting
That's right,
process.
which I love. I love the Prolon program and other fast mimicking. I mean, I got to say, I'm a fan of the Prolon. I do it myself. I think going into autophagy naturally by fasting at least 3 days, he suggests five, but also says 3 is fine. I think it's great for your body, but not to do it every day. I mean, this is
Mm.
something you do a couple times a year, 2, 3 times a year. And I think the health benefits are dramatic. So that's really, yeah, that's great. Another thing that I learned along the way that I think would really benefit women in particular has to do with exercise, which in many ways is the silver bullet for longevity and health. We know that exercise has all kinds of benefits for our body, so I don't need to go through a list of what they are. But there's a few things you can do to actually make your exercise experience even more effective. For one thing, exercise in the morning. Now, I know it's really hard for me to exercise in the morning because that's my most productive time of day, but I'm really, since I learned this, I'm really trying to do it. Between 7 and 10 in the morning is actually fantastic. Earlier is fine too. And if you go into it in a still fasting state so that you haven't yet eaten, it's even more effective. So to me,
It's really interesting. So why it's really interesting because so why would exercise before 10 a.m. be so pro longevity? Because when you look at like the circadian clock and you look at like the optimal time for hypertrophy, right? Or for strength, or when Olympians have won medals. It's always after midday. So it seems like the
That's right.
body is sort of more primed. Why is exercise pre 10 a.m. so good from a longevity perspective?
Okay, so I'm not sure that I can give you a concise answer on this, but every single researcher that I talked to that was in the fitness and exercise and longevity field seemed to agree. And more than that, they said that exercising after 6 p.m. was actually not that great for you because
Interesting.
it messes with your circadian rhythms, as
Mm,
sort of alluded
yeah,
to. And yeah, you want to be able to sleep at night. It's not that complicated. Now, I
it's not good.
sometimes do exercise towards the end of the day because it's better to get something in than nothing in.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Well,
think
you've
there's no
made me
hard and
feel
fast
happy.
rules.
You've made me feel happy about my 5 a.m. workouts because
Oh,
I tend
great.
to fit it
Wow,
in
you're
before the
impressive.
kids. Well, do you know, it's because I think as a mom who's sort of running multiple businesses and I've still got my kids to get to school and things like that, it's the time of day that I can fit it in. If I was to leave it later, I've tried this, it just doesn't end up happening. So at least
Yeah.
I know that's one thing I can control is get up and go and do my exercise straight away. So yeah, I'm happy to hear that's a positive thing for longevity.
Yeah, and
Um,
you mentioned something else in what you just said that's really interesting, and that is the word control, that you feel like you have more control. And feeling that sense of control actually is it's part of that positivity effect. It gives you a sense of empowerment, of feeling like you can conquer the world. So I
yeah.
think that's really great.
Yeah, it does. It's so true. And I also find that it helps regulate my brain. Do you know what I mean? It gives me that sense of sort of order and discipline. So I'm more productive. I'm better at staying on task when I've exercised, is what I find.
Yeah.
And my energy's higher.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah, I've kind
also
of,
find that focus, it creates a little bit of focus for me. And by the way, if I do exercise towards the end of the day, what I find is it relieves me of a lot of stress that I have built up all day long from doing Zoom calls and writing and talking to people all the time. It really is an energy, in some
mm,
ways it really energizes me, but it also, by the end of the day, I really feel it physically and more mentally than physically. And if I can just take a walk with my dog, it feels so great, especially getting out in
mm.
nature.
Yeah, amazing. I'm the same as you. I'm a big like I love going even for sort of 10-minute walks. The other thing that I've got into is I have this device by FlexBeam, which is a red light therapy device that you can actually put on your body.
Oh,
And
that's
so I will
cool.
it's very cool, and you can put it on to sort of activate the vagus nerve and have it like on the center of your chest. So quite often, if I want to reboot, is I'll put my brain tap meditate like brain training device on, and I'll do a 10-minute brain tap with a 10-minute red light therapy session, and that just energizes me as
You
well.
have to send me a link to that red light therapy that's wearable because I love red light therapy. It's so good for your skin and your energy and even for inflammation in particular. When inflammation, by the way, is a huge deal as we get older, one of the biggest things we need to concern ourselves with. But I feel like I have to stop and I have to go into a red light experience. And yeah, it's more
Yeah.
of a hassle, to be honest with you.
Yeah, this is great because you can strap it on while you're working and you can just carry on doing your
I
red light
love
therapy
that.
treatment, which is pretty amazing, and just do it in multiple areas. And, you know, the studies show, don't they, that even if you target one area, there are systemic benefits. So yeah, super easy. I'll send you that afterwards. Inflammation, really good point that you picked up there. And it's a question that I get asked about a lot. And I know listeners will be interested in. How do we measure inflammation in the body and know that we're on track? I know a lot of women report feeling inflammatory like symptoms around that perimenopausal transition in terms of things like joint pain, muscular pain. You mentioned anxiety contributes that, right? And I think there's a great
That's
book on
right.
that, The Body Keeps the Score, and which is really amazing. When you're looking at sort of measuring inflammation, what would be kind of some of the tests and things people could look for? The kind of things I've looked at is sort of like the Omega index, for example, alongside things like HSCRP. But then even within that, there seem to be sort of, you know, tighter ranges that might be looking more at a kind of cardiovascular perspective versus,
Yeah.
you know, an infection in the body. How would people know if they had inflammation?
Okay.
And what are the best ways to sort of measure it and then target it to reduce it?
Yeah, measuring your omegas, I think omega 3s are, I think, a really good tool. And I do it all the time. But just to put it into a context, I listen, by the time you hit 74, you're going to have some issues that you've dealt with in terms of health and wellness. And it's like playing dodgeball. I mean, you got to dodge the bullets as they come to you, or the balls as they come to you. And in the beginning of COVID, when I got my shots, I got the Moderna. I don't know if I should say that, but I got the Moderna 1 and 2, and I was fine after the first, but after the second, I developed a cough and went to my doctor, and she couldn't even believe it. She actually took out her earrings because she thought maybe that was creating the sounds that she was hearing from my chest. And, I've
Wow.
always been so healthy in terms of lungs and heart and all that. But anyway, so she sent me to a pulmonologist. He put me through a variety of inflammatory blood tests, and I didn't have inflammation. That was not my issue. Instead, but there are these blood tests that can go pretty deeply into measuring your levels of inflammation, and they need to be done through or recommended by a physician, and they need to be interpreted by a physician. So these are not self-administered tests. But interestingly, in this case, I actually got spots on my lungs. He, I know you're looking at me like, wow, that sounds horrible. It was
Sounds
horrible.
serious.
It,
Yeah, it sounds
it was
serious.
very serious. It was not anything to joke about at all. The pulmonologist who was head of pulmonology at the University of California at San Francisco, which is one of the premier pulmonology departments in the country. He used me as a case study because he couldn't figure out where it came from. And finally, he called me up and he said, you know what? You're one of those few people who had a very bad reaction from the vaccine, and that caused it. So I had to go on to cortisone for 6 months, which is definitely not something I would suggest to anyone. It did take care of the problem, though, which is great. So I'm completely healthy now. But, this was a wake up call for me. And even though this wasn't about inflammation, it made me feel for people who have that experience of inflammation, and to know that, this is a place where if you have a great physician and they can really listen to you, they will do the kinds of blood tests that you really need to get done to really get to the bottom of the issues. There's one other thing I would say about that. And I think, although in general, I think that people just should kind of eat the rainbow and eat healthy, real food, not too much, mostly plants, as Michael Pollan says. But as we get older, because of inflammation, and that's one of the hallmarks of aging, one of the 12 hallmarks of aging, what we know is we need to fight it all the time. So going on an anti-inflammatory diet is something that I would highly recommend, and it's not that hard to do. So as you probably are well aware, it's you cut out sugar, that's hard to do because it's in everything.
Mm.
You cut out gluten, which there's so many great products that are gluten free today that's not a big deal. And you need to cut out dairy. So I went on a diet like this, and within 6 weeks, all the pain in my body went away. So it's pretty
Mm.
miraculous.
That is. That is. And is that when you say cut out dairy, is that all dairy products? So even like a bit of grass fed butter, for example, or is it more cutting out sort of milk and things like that?
I think when you start it, and for the first 6 to 8 weeks, you cut out everything.
Okay.
Everything, all kinds of cow milk related products. And then you can add things in little by little if your body can tolerate it. But, listen, grass fed butter and ghee, they're great products. I love them both. But, you have to, if you're dealing with inflammation, you need to take the steps necessary. And then you can add things in little by little and see what your body's reacting to.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Once you've excluded everything, it makes it much easier, right, to see what is affecting you and what isn't.
Yeah,
Um,
and I have a friend who I said she was having bad hip pain, and I told her she should try this, and she like ugh, that's way too hard. But then she came back to me a few months later and said, okay, remind me what this is because I want to do it. I want to go on this anti-inflammatory diet because I just can't take the pain anymore. And again, within 6 to 8 weeks, she called me up and said, wow, I feel like a different person.
Amazing, amazing, just from that change. What about when you were talking there a little bit earlier? You were mentioning around Alzheimer's, and we talked about the link with hormonal health for
Yes.
women. Um, what can women be thinking about? Because I think this is a sort of tricky point, right? Many women, as they go through that perimenopausal phase and they cross over into sort of postmenopause, they experience brain fog. It can be a worrying time in a woman's life, right? Because she goes into a room, she forgets why she's gone in there. She doesn't necessarily like remember things as well. For example, recalling things when she's in conversation, and that could be really worrying because many women are like, "Oh my goodness, like, is this the beginning? Like, could there be something wrong?" But my understanding is that the brain is going through a bit of a reorganization at that point, and for many women post menopause, actually things look a lot better. And I think the research that's coming out is that postmenopausal women are much happier and contented than other age groups, and they also kind of they worry less, they kind of give less of a shit about things, but in a good positive way, right? They have less anxiety, sort of the other side. How can we recognize when symptoms like that might be a sign of something more sinister? Because I know when I spoke with Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote The End of Alzheimer's, he was saying how the earlier you can get in, if things are going in that direction, and he talks about his cognoscopy, the more you can do about it. What should women be looking out for, and what kind of steps can they take to really protect the health of their brains?
Okay, let's unpack what you've said just a little bit. So, first of all, I know Dale Bredesen. He definitely takes an extreme point of view, but he's, I think he knows a lot about this information, and I agree with much of what he says. But let's first talk about what you mentioned, that U curve of happiness, which we've done studies at AgeWave, the company I co-founded. There have been studies done at Stanford and at Yale that seem to confirm the fact that as both men and women hit the age of 50, their levels of happiness and their levels of contentment and resilience actually rise, and their levels of anxiety go way down. Now, that's great news all by itself.
I'm
And
looking
it
forward
does
to
begin, yeah, so that's really good news. More
Yeah.
good news. So we want to focus on the good news. Now, to talk about hormone shifts that go on in our bodies. So there's a lot of poo-pooing of women going through perimenopause and menopause, which is so, I think, outrageous. I mean, they get dismissed as, oh, these are just symptoms that you'll go through. Well, that isn't really true. It's much bigger than that. Estrogen, we know, is neuroprotective. And when your estrogen is depleted, and when it's not depleted in a regular way, which happens during perimenopause, but in a irregular way, it can create all kinds of challenges for you, especially when it comes to your brain health. And it shouldn't be ignored. For many, many, many years, hormone replacement therapy was the standard practice. But then in the early 2000s, a study came out, the Women's Health Initiative, that used synthetic hormones, not bioidentical hormones. And they found that there were some serious side effects, potential heart disease and such, from taking these kinds of hormones. And so all the gynecologists in the world saw this study and they said, no, we're not doing hormone replacement anymore. But then what we learned was, well, that was a flawed study. And I don't need to go into why it was flawed, but it was flawed. It came out as being a flawed study. However, many gynecologists who are well-meaning and certainly care about their patients still utilize this philosophy that no, avoid hormone replacement, when in fact, hormone replacement can actually help your brain health. So I want to say that again because it's really important. Hormone replacement can actually help your brain health. And
Mhm.
you want, women in particular, we need to do everything we can to protect our brain health. And The key is you want to use bioidentical hormones. And if you have breast cancer in your family or ovarian cancer or any kind of fertility related cancer, you either want to avoid it or you want to find a doctor who is a menopause specialist who understands that there are, because it's the progesterone, not the estrogen, that's the problem in terms of any kind of health risks. There are some replacements for the progesterone, including something called a Mirena IUD. So again, I'm not a doctor. I've done research for all these years, but from talking to several top gynecologists, this is what I've learned. So yeah,
Well, so for women that are at risk potentially of things like breast cancer, then estrogen in combination with the Mirena coil may be a
yes,
suitable solution.
that's right.
Okay,
That is what I
interesting.
have heard, but I would suggest go to a menopause specialist. There are, if you Google it in your area, there are OB-GYNs and then there's gynecologists who specialize in menopause. Find one who specializes, that they will understand the right path for you.
Mm-hmm. And what about in terms of like women that often I think when we look at women and they're overweight, like getting on top of their metabolic health is going to be key as well, right? Because we know that fat cells produce a specific form of estrogen.
That's
So
right.
in terms of metabolism, I mean, a lot of what we talk about on the podcast is making sure you're strength training, making sure you're controlling your blood glucose. Can you dive into a little bit more in terms of what your research has shown are the key things from a metabolic and fitness perspective that women need to be thinking about to help to slow down the aging process?
Okay, well, this is not my area of expertise. I think a physician can really answer this more effectively than me, but I will tell you what I know from a longevity perspective, or first of all, these issues become bigger for women as they get older. You're 100% right. From what I anecdotally know, and this is truly anecdotal, get a test on your thyroid as you begin to experience metabolic issues. So you can either get on a Synthroid or another thyroid medication, which is very safe and been used for years, or you'll rule out having a thyroid issue. And I think that that's an important step to take. So, and it's something that you can do with your doctor. And it's a pretty standard test. So your doctor's not going to get bent out of shape by having you take that test, and we'll be able to go through all the results with you and make some suggestions. So I think that that's an important step. I also think that wearing a glucose monitor, I mean, I am not pre-diabetic, and I've been thinking very seriously about getting a glucose monitor, because then you know what foods set you off. And I think I think knowledge is power, and having that information is really powerful. And the fact that more of this information can get in the hands of us, and we are the CEOs of our own health, each of us individually, I think that that's really good news. So I would, I'm not telling everyone they should go out and buy a glucose monitor, but they should look at the kinds of foods that set them off and those that don't. And, again, just from a strictly longevity perspective, I would eliminate all sugar, uh, all added sugar whenever possible, because sugar is toxic. And that also, unfortunately, in my opinion, means that you should either limit or completely exclude alcohol. That includes wine, because that metabolizes as sugar. So those are some things that you can empower yourself with in terms of metabolic health, that's from someone like me instead of from a physician.
And what about we were talking there earlier about you look so young. What can people do from a skin? You got lovely hair, skin and health, a skin and hair perspective. I know for many women, for example, when they're going through menopause, and some of this may be thyroid related, as you've sort of mentioned, that they feel like their hair is thinning, particularly around that sort of loss in estrogen. It seems to have an impact on collagen and elastin production. What can women do so that they continue to feel confident and age well in terms of their skin and hair health?
Well, there's several things that you can do. First of all, I do believe, this is something that people have said for many, many decades, and that is you are what you eat. So, if you eat a healthy diet, your skin is going to look better. If you eat the anti-inflammatory diet that we talked about earlier, and you drink a lot of water. Hydrating, I think, is seriously important. That means, I think most people know this, but drinking half of your body weight in ounces. I know that in Great Britain and most of the world, you don't even do ounces. But
Do you know when you say so? When you say that, there's like the European listeners are like, oh my God, like this is so many calculations for me, which I believe is half your body weight in pounds you're talking about there.
of course,
Drink that in ounces. So then what you need to do is to convert from kilograms by timesing by 2.2 into pounds. Then halve that. That will give you your ounces. And then I think you multiply it by something like 28 and a half milliliters.
yeah,
And then
okay,
that gives you, because I
sorry,
run
I
that
really
calculation.
apologize for that.
No, but it's such a great calculation and it works with the sort of imperial system so well, just less so with the metric. But I think I've got it right. Someone can go and run that calculation. I think that gives you the answer.
Well, I think that hydrating, I find that if I don't drink a lot of water one day, or if I've had a little wine, sorry, I know I'm not supposed to do that, but occasionally that glass of wine feels really great. Um, I see it in my skin. I really see it in my skin. So those are a couple things. I think exercise, getting rid of those toxins in your body through exercise,
Yeah, huge.
huge effect on your skin. And then, of course, there's skin care. And I think there's some things we can all do. I really think vitamin C on your skin is great. I think some kind of a retin-A kind of product that doesn't irritate your skin, and there's so many out there, and make sure you get a clean version of it. But I think that those are two things that are really great for your skin. I have a dermatologist who gives me this whole line of stuff, and I've gotten to the point where that's like 8 products. I'm not going to put all that on every day and every night. It's too much. So I have really pared down to vitamin C, to retin-A, and using some kind of good hydration end product after all that. I use something that's I'm sure no one's ever heard of, but it's called CoQ Lift, and I really like it. It's like a mousse, and you put it on, and it literally absorbs into your skin, and it's almost like you feel your skin gaining some volume.
CoQ
Good
lift, is
way.
it?
Not getting puffy, but
Yeah.
gaining some volume. So I really
And
like
it's
that.
called CoQ lift.
Yeah, CoQ Lift. I can send you a
Oh,
photo
interesting. Okay.
afterwards if you want. I love
Yes,
it.
please.
It's a great product. Again, it's an investment that I'm making in myself. I, I'm scared of doing it. Listen, I think it's great. People do whatever they want to look good and feel good, and no judgment here at all. But getting something like a facelift, a friend of mine showed me pictures of what they did to her when she got a facelift, and you literally lift up the skin. It was way too scary for me to ever do
Scary.
anything like that.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to live without that one. But I do love things that build collagen, any kind of treatment that can help build collagen, because as you said, once you hit menopause and you're beyond postmenopause, like me, collagen is an issue, and I don't like taking collagen supplements particularly, but I do want to get that collagen to refurbish itself.
Mm. And renew it. Do you use like red light therapy treatments on your
I
face as
do.
well?
I love red light therapy treatments. As I said before, when you were saying that you have one that you just put on and you can still work or walk or whatever, for me, it's like, oh, I have to go somewhere to do a red light treatment. And although it's a great time to rest or meditate and just relax, it's also kind of time consuming.
Yeah.
So that's the downside of that. But it's great. I love it. It's something I would highly recommend. I love all these things that can build collagen and get rid of inflammation, that are so good for us and make us feel good and frankly look good.
Yeah. Amazing. There's a company I've got no affiliation with them called Omnilux that I use that do a variety of masks. So again, you can walk around. Sometimes I'll be doing my kids' breakfast and I have my Omnilux red light therapy mask on. It looks a little
I
bit
love
scary
it.
if I
Yeah.
wake them up in the morning with it. Make them
Well,
up
as
with a
long as
little
your
bit of a
kids aren't
jump, but
scared, that sounds great.
yeah. It's a good one. Anything else that you think we need to be thinking about that we haven't covered? I know there's so much in the book, and as you say, there's the financial and wealth part as well, which is highly relevant.
Yeah, I think that, we talked before we went on air about sleep, and I think that sleep is really important. Interestingly, if any of your viewers or their parents or grandparents are over the age of 65, almost all of the major sleep studies have not even been done on people over the age of 65.
Mm.
So one of the nice things that I heard from one of the sleep experts that I spoke to, Dr. Phyllis Z from Northwestern, she told me that she'd rather get 5 hours of great sleep than 7 hours of very light sleep that doesn't really make her feel refreshed in the morning. And that made me feel much better because sleep is definitely not my superpower. And
Mm.
just knowing that you don't have to be quite as amazing with sleep or so regimented to that 7 to 9 hours a night. She said, as long as you wake up feeling refreshed, then you know you're getting enough sleep. And that made me feel good. She also said
Mm.
one other thing. She said that sleep medicine, this whole idea of the science of sleep, it's really evolving into being circadian rhythm science. And that it really is all about your circadian rhythm. So, when you wake up in the morning and opening up your shades or walking outside and getting that sun on you for 5-10 minutes in the morning, that can actually help your sleep at night. And to me, that was great news.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. I think I learned that if you can get outside before 10 a.m., you can influence the time at which you go to bed. And then 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., I believe, is sort of circadian dead time. So you're not going to move the needle on that circadian clock, but you get other benefits like vitamin D and also like the mood boosting benefits. And you were talking earlier about going out in nature and then observing what I think Andrew Huberman calls the biological night between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. And I think that's probably where people find it tricky, right? To make sure that they're sort of in bed or at least have all the lights really, really dimmed or off by 10 p.m.
Yeah.
So is what you're saying there then that I think in the book you mentioned that ideally you would get 7 hours. From speaking to the experts that you interviewed, have you found then that as long as the quality of the sleep is high and the regularity of that routine, that may be off enough to sort of offset some sleep deficits? Or is it highly variable from one individual to another as to how much that sleep need is?
I do think it's highly variable from one person to another and that we need to judge it for ourselves. For instance, however, let me just add this one other thing. Using myself as a guinea pig, I used to think, oh, I'm getting great sleep by getting 6 hours a night, which is what I used to get until I started changing some of my behaviors from what I learned, including, worshiping the sun, if you will, doing a sun salutation in the morning. And then I found that no, 7 hours is better for me. I mean, it's a better sweet spot. So there's that to consider. I mean, experimenting with it a little. I would not suggest to people taking melatonin, which is really not a drug of choice for most sleep scientists. They don't particularly care for it. They think there's other things like magnesium, especially magnesium threonate, that can really help you sleep better because it's a calming agent. It calms your body. Melatonin is basically a jet lag agent. I mean, if you're flying from London to New York, and that's when you take melatonin. So, and most of the melatonins out there are pretty high milligrams, and you don't really need that much. You're going to feel groggy the next day.
Yeah, you get
So,
that
yeah, I would say
residual
that.
hangover. Yeah, it's very difficult to get melatonin in the UK. You need it
Really?
as a prescription. Yeah, you can't just go and buy it. So I like you, like you were saying that I tend to buy it if I'm doing that transatlantic flight and going over to the US, and it's amazing for resetting and like avoiding jet lag to the best part. The best part, but yeah, it's interesting how widely available it is. And I'd read that in America, if you go and buy melatonin off the shelf, the amount that it says on the label actually it can vary widely, which is quite scary of actually what is in it.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Although Dale Bredesen does recommend, he's one of the few doctors that I can think of. He recommends people taking melatonin to
Mm,
help with their dementia or
interesting.
pre-dementia symptoms.
Right, right. I think Dr. Rhonda Patrick seems to be a fan of melatonin as well. Okay. So definitely sleep. We talked about nutrition, anti-inflammatory diet. Fitness is important. I know you have some other flexibility and balance related tests that we were talking about, the Flamingo test, the sitting and standing. What are those? The Flamingo test sounds to be a bit about kind of proprioception and really understanding right balance and how the brain is like communicating to the
Yeah,
feet.
that's
But can
exactly
you,
right. I mean, yeah. Uh, in Ageless Aging, one of the things I point out in the chapter on fitness is number one, it's a superpower. I mean, exercising, even just walking for 30 minutes a day, it's going to make you feel better, look better, be better. But as you get older and as early as in your 40s, you start to lose muscle mass. That's sarcopenia. And the only way that you can conquer that is by doing strength training. And I know you talk about that in a lot of your other shows. But strength training is really an important thing. But there are other things that are equally important as you get older. Balance. So that's where the Flamingo test comes into play. Many of your listeners probably have done yoga and done the tree pose. It's pretty similar to that. I show it in Ageless Aging, but it's about being able to take a pose on one leg with your hands above
is
your
it like
head.
this? Oh, above your head
Well,
here.
actually, above your head, yeah,
Okay. And is it where
for
you
at least.
slide your other leg up like that?
That's
Is it?
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm doing the tree pose. Anyone
It
watching?
is very similar, but it's very similar.
Yeah.
And holding that for 10 seconds. So it's a great way because you don't want to, as you get even older, you don't
Mm,
want to trip and fall or fall on the ice and then break a hip and then, oh my God, look at me. That's, you don't want to end up there. So this is a great way to create balance. The other thing to keep in mind was the sitting to standing. Uh, Again, a little hard to describe verbally, but let me try. So if you're sitting on the floor, cross-legged, and you get up from that position without using your arms at all, you're in great shape. Same thing, but you have to get back down again
but you
without,
can, so I can do this. So, but you can cross your legs, right? So you can cross
yes,
them over because that makes it a bit easier, doesn't
it
it?
does make
You
it
got a bit
easier.
more
And
leverage as you get up.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great test for longevity, frankly, and it's it's really been successful and help. And you can get better. That's the good news. You can get better.
Mm. Yeah,
These
you
are
can
all
practice
things that you
these
can get
things.
better at. Practice, yeah.
I've heard as well that your grip strength is correlated with the health of your brain.
That's exactly right. And I think that, there are those little grip thingies that you can use to strengthen your grip. I think they're also good for your stress. For some reason, when I do it, it makes me feel a little more relaxed. I don't know why. That's
Take the
anecdotal
tension
also.
out on it. Yeah.
But one of the things that I will tell you that is kind of interesting in terms of this idea of exercise and this idea of supplements. And as you know, most doctors don't recommend a lot of supplements, if any, and primarily in the US anyway, because they're not FDA approved. So that's their modus operandi, is to not recommend any. But my doctor, I have high cholesterol in my family. It's genetic. And so I take a very, very small dose of a statin. And apparently there are a lot of side effects from a statin. And I
Mm.
was getting some of them, including I was losing muscle strength. And it was kind of scary. I couldn't do a sit up the way I usually can do it. And I called my doctor and he said, oh, try CoQ10 before we just take you off the statin completely. So I tried CoQ10 and it completely took care of the problem. And by the way, it also helped with if I ever get brain fog, it got rid of it completely.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've heard, because I think statins deplete CoQ10, don't they? And obviously, like with aging as well, that's important.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, amazing. So, when is the book is out on May 14th, I believe. I think in
May
the UK,
14th in the
in
US, which is the
the
beginning of
US.
National Women's Health Week. Also available on Kindle globally that same day. In the UK, I think it's in June.
Yep, I think the Kindle I see is available on the 14th of May, as you say, and then the hardcover is released on the 27th of June, so a bit later. Yeah, so
Great.
it's exciting. Yeah, amazing. And
Yeah,
how
it's
can
already
people?
available for pre-order if people
Oh, is it
are
okay?
interested.
Brilliant. So they can go and pre-order it and lock in the guaranteed price. I can actually see on Amazon. Maddy, how can people connect with you and your work? You have such a big body of work. How can they
Oh,
connect
great.
with
I
you?
would love for people to connect. They can go to my website, which it's complicated because my name is not easy. It's maddydychtwald.com. But it's MADDYDYCHTWALD. Yeah, that's a great way for
That's the
people
best place.
to know more about ageless aging and see some of the other work that I've been involved in, because I've been doing this kind of research for, as I said earlier, close to 40 years.
It's a long time.
It
Amazing.
is.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Thanks again.
Thank you, Angela. This has been fun.